My name is Yaniv, as Gal said. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of Vulcan. Been running this company for about 5.5 years, working with different organizations in different sizes, from different geographies, different industries, to practically build effective cyber risk programs. I'm going to help them scale them up to the enterprise level. I think that what we have seen in the past couple of years, and especially in the past 18 months, as we started to route back from COVID to regular work, but also get to a point where all of the efforts we did throughout COVID actually started paying off in terms of migration to cloud, adoption of SaaS, providing more and more and more digital services. As the business is starting to run faster, what we also see, and I've talked about it a lot, people here that have heard me talk about it before, the actual attack surface that needs to be governed by the enterprise today is growing exponentially. It's not only that we have more infrastructures, apps, code bases, repositories, inventories we have to manage, but the tools that the cybersecurity market is offering are enhancing their capabilities or are building new capabilities to provide us with more information around the posture of these attack surfaces. And from a reality, 5 to 10 years ago, where we had a single source of truth for risk and vulnerabilities and practically one or two tools that provide us with the insights that we need in order to manage the attack surface exposure externally and internally. What we are seeing today across practically all Fortune 2000, but also all the way down to commercial, smaller enterprises, hyperscale tech companies, hedge funds, law firms, and so on, is that they themselves are also dependent on these different technology advancements that brings with them new tools that are scanning them, that are providing information around them, and eventually the findings from these tools has to be managed at enormous scale. Now, when you are a large enterprise, the amount of findings you need to manage are by the tens, if not hundreds of millions. And they were by the tens of hundreds of millions 5 to 10 years ago when we were only scanning our network. Now what happens is that we added more and more layers. We practically added more tens or hundreds of millions of findings and tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of assets in different permutations. It could be, the old generational hosts. It could be containers, images, code projects, applications. SaaS applications are now being scanned by SSPMs and provide us with this new type of permutation of findings and posture issues. All of these together are continuing to expand. The tools that we are seeing in the market, some of them are also here participating with us, are providing new and innovative ways to identify and understand risks better. And we, as an information security group, we have to understand how we can help and how we can scale the operation to actually both empower the remediation owners, people across the lines and the fence of security, and make sure they are empowered to actually take decisions and eventually remediate risk in the best way possible. When we look at the reality today, as we look at our customer base, but also as we talk with enterprises all around the world, what we usually see is north to 20 different tools that are providing relevant information that is necessary to identify risk, to prioritize different findings and vulnerabilities, to understand the asset and attack surface, and eventually to put it into context. We see that these tools are presenting north to 10,000 new vulnerability instances on a daily basis to these enterprises, alongside a pile that is usually larger than 100,000 critical vulnerabilities from these tools. Some of them are more accurate in the way they calculate it. Some of them are less accurate and less contextful than the others in creating it. Some are deduplicated findings, so not every tool lives in a silo, but actually every platform that we deploy, either in the cloud, in the network, in the code, has some kind of connected tissue, connected context of things that it finds that eventually can be associated to one singular finding or one singular asset if correlated and deduped together. And eventually, as a security team, if we had to only work with IT in the past, now we are required to work with a lot of different remediation owners and remediation stakeholders in the enterprise. It could be different admins of different SaaS applications. It could be DevOps and engineers. It could be still IT teams that we have to work and operate with them directly for us in different geographies, in different companies we have acquired through M&A. So there are a lot of things we have to do in order to manage this scale in a way that we can apply the right measurements to reduce risk. And this challenge is real. So when we talk with both the InfoSec practitioners and InfoSec executives on what is difficult and why is this becoming so hard to manage this, we see the vulnerability overall discussions around the numbers. We see how hard it is to identify the right remediation owner, who owns this application on this asset, who is the right developer that pushed this code, who compiled this container, who is the admin of this particular system. All of these things are very hard to associate because these data sets around ownership is distributed across CMDBs, code repositories, different enterprise proprietary databases that we have built. And this creates tons of manual work, extremely difficult path to track remediation, and eventually lack of ability to adhere to SLAs. To the practitioners, the executives in the enterprises are finding it extremely hard to just answer simple questions like, what is my risk exposure? How well do I track around the current findings that I have, and how quickly am I remediating? What is the difference between the tools I have deployed, and how can they give me the information that I can take in order to lead eventually to effective remediation? And how can I not only communicate with my peers, but how could I answer to different audit committees, auditors, board with questions around what is my actual risk? Because as we all already are aware, vulnerabilities do not equal risk, and findings do not equal risk. They are part of an equation that eventually leads to risk. And lastly, the people who works with us, our allies, as we like to call them in Vulcan, that are actually running remediation, cloud engineers, developers, IT, admins, and so on. They want to get distilled data, accurate, trustworthy, with insights around what they can do with it. Because when we need to remember, this data set and these tasks are not core abilities to their day-to-day. They have a lot of other tasks on their docket. Developers need to release more new features. IT need to keep the business running. All of these folks have security as just one more line item in their day-to-day. And as effectively as we can empower them, and the better we can in an enterprise realm find the path to disseminate the right data, the better the program would be. And this takes us to the larger question. How are we, as an enterprise, have the ability to scale this process effectively, especially as we have this premise that will not change, that we will continue and onboard new posture scanners because we're going to be obligated by regulatory compliance. We're going to be obligated by our professional integrity to say where we need to have eyes, we must have eyes. We cannot unscan our cloud environment. We cannot undetect PIIs. We cannot remain or leave like our SaaS applications are not in a position where they are unsecured, although they have a lot of sensitive data of the company stored with them. We need to provide this visibility, and therefore we have to build this connective tissue, this layer that helps us stitch risk across cloud, code, applications, on-prem, SaaS, whatever IoT, whatever it will be. We need to see it in one place. And it starts, first of all, by the ability to correlate the data. Us as enterprises, when we have to manage with every tool that we connect with tens of millions of findings, that at least a portion between 20 to 50% of them are duplicated findings that we can find in other tools, we have to build the infrastructure to associate these findings into one, and to eventually be able to take these pieces and findings and drive them to a point where we can effectively go to a remediation owner and say, across all of the tools that I have, this is a singular finding you need to resolve. This is a singular thing that needs to happen for you to be able to eventually drive efficiently remediation. Then, after we have deduplicated these findings, we need to understand how we can enrich them and how we can provide further context, both on internal business-related signals, like does this application have PIIs? Is this vulnerability exploitable? What type of exploits in the wallet do we have? What kind of controls can we associate to these particular assets? And eventually understand the full context of every finding on every asset. From there, as we have built it out, probably in a data lake or in something similar, we as enterprises have to provide a very, very distinct logic to prioritize vulnerabilities. Vulnerability and finding prioritization is not a new thing. We've been talking about this for a decade. But the more we deepen our grasp in looking at more types of findings, the harder it becomes to actually prioritize appropriately. Prioritizing vulnerabilities is a very, very, very difficult task in scale. If we have hundreds of millions of vulnerabilities, even if we cut them by 95%, we still have millions to resolve. And this will lead eventually the organization to an understanding where we need to start thinking about new, more innovative ways to tie vulnerabilities together into attack stories, into actions like upgrade this operating system or change this entire code base into a different code base, or do things or retire this end-of-life application that is running and no one is using in order to reduce risk. We will have to do things that are essentially more effective in identifying or reducing risk to manage this scale in today's enterprise reality. Then we have to find an effective way to basically correlate the database of owners to understand how our counterparts are associating tasks to one another and infuse ourselves where they live. They will be eventually, in many cases, the people that are driving the process for remediation and are being in a position to reduce risk effectively. And we need to meet them, and we need the data to meet them where they are. And lastly, we have to associate all of these efforts back into tangible, trendable measurements that we can go to our managers, our board, our counterparts, the people that are remediating, and show them progress. Show them that their efforts are not in vain. These 5 steps are 5 steps that are mandatory in order to drive an effective and scalable risk-based vulnerability and finding program that will scale up to the enterprise level. When we look at the ecosystem, we also need to understand there are going to be circles of engagement. The InfoSec team, from practitioners to executives, will probably live under this or within this correlated or fused data lake that will provide them everything they need to know in a consolidated manner across all tools. Then some remediation owners are not entitled enough to have their own workflow, system of record, and so on. And they will probably also try to use the same platform and engage with the data through the platform that InfoSec is engaging with. We should let them. We should have controls, role-based access, SSO, two-factor, because the data is very, very, very sensitive. But if they need to get access to the data, we need to let them, even if it's within our platform. And then the wider circle, that is usually the largest amount of users, would like to consume this data within their native workflows. It could be something very naive, like through an email or through a Slack message. It could be something very structured, like service tickets in ServiceNow, tickets in Jira, and so on and so forth, so they can engage with these tasks in the same way they are engaging. Now, as a large enterprise, we always go and ask ourselves the ultimate question. Should we invest to build something that is proprietary to us? Because we need to be honest, we are honest with ourselves in Vulcan. When we meet a large enterprise, we understand that there are uniqueness in the way they drive their workflow, uniqueness in their environment, uniqueness in what they do. And they ask themselves always, what is more cost effective? In the 2080 approach, where do I earn more? When I build something or when I buy something? These are just a couple of things to consider, but I think it all trickles down to one thing. If we believe that a vendor can provide us with a good to sometimes even excellent with some of the vendors approach to the problem, even if it's not going to be a custom tailored suit, it will probably be dramatically cheaper than building. Things like scalability, because the number of findings is growing all the time. So, associated costs of cloud or data lake maintenance is also something that we need to take under consideration. The actual changes to the APIs that are very frequent and which some people have to keep pace on, the actual expertise around building the business logic and updating it all the time. These are one of these things I would recommend to consider alongside the benefits of building, which is getting something that is tailor-made to you with the downsides of it. In my opinion, eventually it's a matter both of an outcome related to cost. If you have the ability to spend, it might be the right thing to you. If not, it will not. Us at Vulcan, this is what we've been doing for half a decade. We've built a platform that does exactly that. It has the right way to extract data at extreme scale. It has the right way to process, did you enrich this data and eventually prioritize it at extreme scale, and then disseminate this data to the right owners at extreme scale. Do each and every one of these things in a way that is automated, adjustable for the enterprise, it's flexible, and in a way that allows us to then provide this overarching wrap of actuality when it comes to driving the platform forward. If it's integrating with over 100 tools and more across all attack surfaces, if it's correlating the different data pieces between assets and vulnerabilities, providing our own risk agenda, but also understanding that large enterprises have probably risk departments that are larger than Vulcan 2 or 3 times, and therefore I am not, or we are not going to tell them how to manage their risk. We're going to adapt our risk formula to their risk appetite. If it's having the ability to report easily and build new reports for all these different stakeholders, hundreds of stakeholders that want to consume this data in an aggregated manner, to the point where we can bring this excessive insight, where we can bring innovation, where we can show attacker context for vulnerabilities, attack paths, where we can bring in more data around the solutions and resolutions. This is where we shine, and this is where we help our enterprise customers eventually achieve the results they need.